A white professor suddenly discovered something unusual. The new black janitor in his lab was secretly reading his medical textbooks. Seeing how focused the man was, the professor had an idea. He decided to test this eager learner. He pointed at an instrument nearby and asked what it was. To his surprise, the janitor answered without hesitation.
Van Slyke Neal gas manometer, sir, doctor.
The professor could hardly believe it. The answer was completely correct. Next, he asked to see the janitor's hands. After only a moment of observation, the professor was astonished. He handed him a pair of tongs and told him to pick up a test tube. Thomas did it with ease. The professor then raised the difficulty, asking him to use his left hand. But Thomas completed the task just as smoothly. He even picked up a cork and sealed the bottle with a quick twist. His skillful movements delighted the professor. Even the professor's college students were not this capable. The very next day, Thomas was promoted to lab assistant. But when his wife heard the news, there was no joy on her face, because the title sounded important, but the pay was only $12 a week. That was just a third of what he earned as a carpenter. Still, Thomas valued the long-term future this job could bring.
Sweetheart, it's important work, and it's a real opportunity, and I love what I'm doing.
Thomas hadn't applied for this job on a whim. Since childhood, he had carried a dream of medicine. After graduating high school, he worked 7 years as a carpenter. His goal was to save enough money to enter medical school. But one day, the bank where he kept his savings collapsed. All his money was gone. His chance to study medicine seemed lost. Fortunately, through a friend's introduction, he found work at a medical school. The pay was low, but it brought him closer to his dream. He was willing to clean even the dog kennels if it meant staying near medicine. Soon, his talent caught the professor's attention. Promoted to lab assistant, he now had the chance to truly learn. With determination and natural ability, Thomas advanced quickly. Months later, he finally faced his first chance to perform surgery. In a traumatic shock experiment, the professor drew a black line on a subject. He ordered Thomas to follow it. Thomas carried out the procedure with precision. Together, their teamwork led to a successful operation. But when the professor asked for the work records, he found nothing. Thomas, with no experience, didn't know what a recorder was. The professor flew into a rage, scolded him, and kicked him out of the lab. Yet after Thomas left, the professor found his notebook. Every step, every detail of the surgery had been carefully written down. It was far more detailed than any recorder. Only then did the professor realize he had been wrong. He ran after Thomas, apologized, and begged him to return. For the first time, Thomas felt deeply moved. He forgave the professor, and from that day on, they became a team. The professor was sharp like a scalpel. Thomas was steady and precise like a pair of forceps. In their 12th year working together, they made a breakthrough in traumatic shock. Their findings were rushed to the battlefield. Countless wounded soldiers were saved. A general came back from the front to thank the professor in person. He announced that the professor would become head of surgery at Johns Hopkins. But at the celebration, the professor took all the credit for himself. Not a word about Thomas. Still, Thomas said nothing. His only goal was to pursue his dream of medicine. Soon after, they moved to Johns Hopkins. For Thomas, it was the temple of his dreams. In the hallways hung portraits of medical legends. The professor said his face would one day be on those walls. Little did he know, Thomas secretly wished for the same. But when they arrived, the security guard told Thomas to clock in at the back door. He was used to this kind of unfair treatment. He followed the order quietly. Even when colleagues questioned him for wearing a lab coat, he stayed calm. Discrimination didn't matter to him. This was the only place he could chase his dream. Soon, other doctors began to admire his work ethic. One day, Dr. Helen spoke with Thomas about a medical problem, blue baby syndrome. It came from congenital heart defects that reduced blood flow to the lungs. Babies' faces and bodies turned bluish purple. At that time, it was considered untreatable. Dr. Helen asked the professor to help solve it. He agreed, though he had no clear plan. Because infants' hearts were so small, he suggested replicating the condition in test subjects first. Then they could search for a solution. But the tiny blood vessels were only a few millimeters wide. Most surgical tools were useless, so the professor asked Thomas to use his carpentry skills. He needed a miniature pair of forceps and a breathing machine. What he didn't know was that Thomas had no time to spare. Every evening after work, he took on 2 more hours as a repairman to support his family. 3 months passed. Thomas still hadn't built the machine or replicated the condition. Colleagues urged the professor to give up. They warned him there was no precedent in heart surgery. If it failed, his reputation would be ruined. But the professor only said,
"Where you see risks, I see opportunity."
Not wanting to disappoint, Thomas cut his sleep down to 3 hours a night. Finally, he managed to rebuild an old machine into a working ventilator. The professor smiled for the first time in months. The very next morning, Thomas began the experiment. At that moment, a doctor named Rommel came to visit. He noticed the strange ventilator and the tiny forceps in Thomas's hands. When he saw Thomas operate with his eyes closed, his curiosity turned to shock. Thomas only said calmly, it was just practice. For once, he had won respect with his skill, but not everyone respected him. One day in the cafeteria, a repairman mocked him. He said Thomas might wear a lab coat, but he was still just a third-class worker, and his own wages were $3 higher than Thomas's. The words hit Thomas like a slap. He went straight to personnel to confirm. The truth stunned him. His title wasn't lab technician. He was officially listed as a third-class janitor, earning only $16 a week. It was open discrimination. He could no longer hold back his anger. One day, while working, the professor joked,
"If you kill that dog, I swear I will take it out of your paycheck."
That was the breaking point. Thomas stopped what he was doing, took off his coat, and walked out. The professor begged him to stay. He told him to ignore the money and focus on the value of the work. But Thomas had a family to feed. The professor could never understand that struggle. After Thomas left, the experiment's oxygen levels reached the perfect point. It meant he had successfully recreated blue baby syndrome. The professor regretted not stopping him. That night, he went to the dean. He insisted Thomas was worth 10 students, and without him, the research was impossible. Moved by his plea, the dean agreed to change the rules. The professor then went to Thomas's home for the first time in 13 years. He told him he had secured a raise, an extra $7 a week. Past wages would also be adjusted, and his title would be raised to surgical technician. Thomas forgave once again and returned to the lab. With his help, they successfully tested a treatment method. At last, there was hope for the blue babies. Soon, the professor contacted parents of sick children. They prepared for surgery. But when he called for assistance, every top doctor lowered their head. The risk was too great. Even the dean begged him to delay, but the professor refused. The child was too ill. As a doctor, he could not stand by and watch. The next day, the historic surgery began. The room was filled with medical elites eager to see. But just as the operation was about to start, the professor was shocked. Thomas was not in the room. He sent people to look for him, and what they discovered was a secret powerful enough to change both their lives forever. Want to know what happened next? Follow me, and I'll share the rest of the story soon.